Welcome, everyone, in the name of the risen Christ. My name is Stephen Stine. I am the deacon at Christ Episcopal Church in Tyler, Texas. This is the adult Christian formation lesson for August 9th, 2020, for the 10th Sunday after Pentecost. And we are continuing our study of the letter to the Hebrews. Today, we're going to be covering chapter 12, verses 1 through 17. Chapter 12, verses 1 through 17. Again, this is a directed reading of this section of the letter to the Hebrews. I will read a portion and then offer a commentary and review about that section and connect it to the bigger themes that are present in the letter to the Hebrews. We begin chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. This phrase, a great cloud of witnesses, is also, we also hear it in Paul's letters. He speaks of the great cloud of witnesses who surround us at all times. And of course, chapter 12 follows chapter 11, and chapter 11 has been all about the great cloud of witnesses, starting with Enoch, starting with Noah, starting with Abel, all the way through the witnesses to God's power in the Hebrew Bible, particularly Abraham, the founder of the people, the founder of the nation of Israel. And they still exist. They have not disappeared. They are a great cloud of witnesses, and witnesses, of course, have to be physically present. They have to be alive. So this great cloud of witnesses are people who may have died physically, but spiritually they are alive. Their spirits are alive. They are still part of God's kingdom and the work that God has to do in the world. And the ultimate witness is Jesus, who, as the reading says, is the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, and who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross. Just as the others, starting with Abel and all the way through the witnesses of the Hebrew Bible, just as they have been willing to give up comfort and to be willing to endure pain and to be willing to endure torment for the greater joy that they knew they were going to have through fulfilling their purpose in God's plan. So Jesus gave up, was willing to endure the shame of the cross, the pain of the cross, because he knew that it would be perfected, it would be overcome, and would be fulfilled and eased by the joy that he was going to receive by following what God told him to do, what God had asked him to do. And so Jesus is seen as the completion, the perfection of this great line of witnesses to God's purpose and the message, and they are all in line with the same belief that whatever they have sought to do, whatever they have had to endure, is overcome by the joy of serving God and fulfilling his purpose in their life. We resume with verse 3. Consider him who endures such hostility against himself from sinners, and the writer is speaking of Jesus, so that you may not grow weary or lose heart. In your struggle against sin, you have not resisted to the point of shedding your blood, and you have forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as children. My child, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, or lose heart when you are punished by him. For the Lord disciplines those whom he loves and chastises every child whom he accepts. So we're continuing to consider the example, the perfecting example of Jesus Christ. Jesus struggled against, allowed sinners to kill him. He allowed sinners to torment him, to torture him, and ultimately to crucify him and to take his physical life. But he was doing it because he was perfecting God's salvation history. He was bringing to a full and complete conclusion to God's promise to humanity. And we also have to remember, according to the writer to the Hebrews, that we continue to be like children in that we have to be willing to accept the disciplining of the Lord and to accept what happens to us so that we can achieve a greater purpose, so that we can put up with whatever happens here. Just as all the witnesses were described in chapter 11, the preceding chapter to what we're reading now, were able to put up with or to endure and make sacrifices in order to achieve some greater reward that was far more powerful and far more fulfilling than anything else in the world. Verse 6, for the Lord disciplines those whom he loves and chastises every child whom he accepts. God's chastisement is not sadistic. God's chastisement, God's disciplining is a way of making us understand that his love transcends anything that the world can offer, but that we have to remain in discipline under his guidance in order to achieve what he knows we can achieve and what he wants for us. Resuming with verse 7, endure trials for the sake of discipline. God is treating you as children. For what child is there whom a parent does not discipline? If you do not have that discipline in which all children share, then you are illegitimate and not his children. Moreover, we had human parents to discipline us, and we respected them. Should we not be more willing to be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good in order that we may share his holiness. So we accepted more or less, the discipline that our parents imposed upon us. And he points out, the writer of Hebrews says that we loved our parents anyway, that we loved our parents even if they did discipline us, and that to whom all parents, as verse 7 says, discipline their children. Now, we're not speaking of harsh discipline. We're not speaking of sadistic treatment. We're talking about loving discipline, the kind of discipline that means that the parent can see beyond what the child can see, and that the discipline, the form in which the rules that are set out for the child's life are things that can be helpful to the child and help the child live in a more fulfilling way than if they did not observe the rules, if they had no discipline, if they simply did as the child wanted to. Verse 8, if you do not have that discipline in which all children share, then you are illegitimate and not his children. In other words, if we refuse to follow the righteous discipline of our parents, then we cannot be their children. And the same thing applies if we do not follow the righteous, loving discipline of God. we cannot then be God's children. Now, discipline, verse 11, now discipline always seems painful rather than pleasant at the time, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. So what happens to us, what we have to endure, what we have to take on as disciples of Jesus may not seem so pleasant at the time, but they are a means to an end. And the end is the joy of being a full disciple. And that joy transcends anything that we can imagine. That joy transcends and fulfills in ways that we cannot possibly imagine. And it is a joy that transcends and fulfills in a way that the world, as we think of the world, cannot give us. Picking up with verse 12. Therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. So, to use a vernacular phrase of the time, buck up. You need to lift your drooping hands. You need to bend your weak knees. You need to strengthen your hands. We need to strengthen our hands. We need to strengthen our knees. We need to make sure that the paths we are on are straight paths, so that we can still, if our joints are not entirely perfect, then we can still get through. We can still walk on straight paths. So keep the path straight so that we do not have to wander around and waste our energy. This is the purpose, this is the meaning of these two verses 12 and 13. And we resume with the final section for today's lesson, verse 14. Pursue peace with everyone and the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and through it may become defiled. See to it that no one becomes like Esau, an immoral and godless person who sold his birthright for a single meal. You know that later, when he wanted to then inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no chance to repent, even though he sought the blessing with tears. Verse 14 is very important because it says, pursue peace with everyone and the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. In other words, we should be at peace as best as we can be with everyone, because this helps guide us in the righteous holiness that God has promised us. The righteous holiness is peace with everyone around us. This does not mean we have to like everyone. This does not mean we have to be in love with everyone. It simply means that we have to love everyone as best we can, and keeping in mind that we are commanded by God to love one another as we love ourselves. So let us be about the peace, establishing and maintaining peace with everyone. And we should see to it that there is no bitterness, that we should not be a party to any bitterness or to any distress or to any strain or to any trouble, which defiles the community of God. We should be at peace, especially with everyone within our own community, within our own worship community, within our own church, within our own congregation. And we should do nothing that defiles that unity. We should do nothing that separates people from peace, that makes lives of others difficult. And the example that the writer uses in verses 16 and 17 is Esau. Esau, remember the story of Jacob and Esau. Esau was willing to give up his inheritance for, in the language of the King James Version of the Bible, for a mess of pottage. In other words, for a simple meal, he was willing to give up his birthright. And then later, when he wanted to inherit the blessing of his father, he was not able to attain it. because he had frittered away needlessly his birthright. So we are to continue in seeking to fulfill our birthright. And our birthright, again, is as disciples of God, as children of God, willing to be disciplined, willing to follow rules set out for us for our own good, not rules of sadistic treatment, but rules that in the end will bring us in a closer relationship with God and a greater fulfillment of that which God has set out and prepared for us. Next Sunday, for August the 16th, we will resume with our study of the letter of the Hebrews. We'll pick up with chapter 12, verse 18, chapter 12, verses 18 to 29. The theme there, the theme of that lesson, a kingdom that cannot be shaken. So I look forward to joining you again. And again, as always, go in peace to love and serve the Lord.